The chisel strikes stone, and everything stops. 40 feet beneath the streets of Jerusalem, in a tunnel barely wide enough for two people to stand shoulder to shoulder. The sound does not echo the way stone usually does. It resonates, low, hollow, and wrong. The archaeologist holds her breath. Around her, a single electric lantern throws pale yellow light against walls that have not seen illumination of any kind since before the Roman Empire reached its height. She raises her hand without speaking. The team behind her freezes. The hollow sound beneath that chisel means there is space on the other side of this wall, space that should not exist. The dust she has dislodged drifts through the lantern light like something ceremonial, settling across the surface of stones that are cut too cleanly, too deliberately, to be accidental. Her colleague leans forward and trains a small flashlight beam along the seam where one massive stone block meets another. The joint is almost seamless. Not Roman, not Byzantine. The style of the cut, the dimension of the blocks, the angle of the corner they have just exposed, none of it matches the stratigraphy they expected to find at this depth. She sets down her chisel and picks up a brush. This is how Jerusalem gives up its secrets, not with announcements or revelations, but with a single, hollow sound in the dark. There are cities in the world whose histories stretch back millennia, and then there is Jerusalem. Excavating it is less like archaeology and more like reading a book written in stone, each chapter pressed down upon the one before it. Jebusites, Israelites, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines. Each civilization arrived, left its mark in stone and soil. The ground beneath Jerusalem is not simply ground. It is a compressed archive of human civilization, and every new excavation is an act of translation. Evidence of human settlement in the area stretches back at least 5,000 years, with some indications of activity even further into prehistory. The earliest known city occupied a ridge now called the City of David, a narrow limestone spur south of what we today recognize as the Old City. Control this spring, and you control life itself in this landscape. Roads, buildings, religious structures, and millennia of accumulated debris form a cap over the archaeological record that makes large-scale excavation extraordinarily difficult. What archaeologists have managed to uncover has come through a combination of tunnel excavations, salvage digs, meticulous survey work, and years of patient, centimeter-by-centimeter removal of soil. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine it. Not the city above, with its noise and crowds and familiar skyline, but the city below. Bronze Age walls resting beneath Iron Age floors. Herodian construction resting atop Hasmonean remains. Crusader rubble covering Byzantine mosaic. That is why the archaeologist with the brush does not sleep for the next 3 days. Teams working in the area of the City of David had been following a known tunnel system, part of a water channel infrastructure that scholars associate with the Late Bronze and Early Iron Age. The most famous of these, a tunnel attributed by many scholars to the reign of the Judahite king Hezekiah. A young boy wading through its waters discovered an inscription carved into the tunnel wall, an account, written in ancient Hebrew, of the workers who carved from both ends and met in the middle. The tunnel walls, which should have been simple bedrock at this depth, showed evidence of intentional shaping, not the rough, utilitarian cutting of a water channel, but the deliberate, squared dressing of stone that suggests architectural purpose. Someone had carved this section of rock not to carry water, but to create a space. Stratigraphy, the science of reading archaeological layers in sequence, is the foundational discipline of field archaeology. And in Jerusalem, it requires extraordinary precision. Every bucket of soil removed from an excavation must be sieved, its contents catalogued, every potsherd, and in a city like Jerusalem, there are always potsherds, the broken fragments of daily life accumulating in the ground the way snow accumulates in a field. An experienced archaeologist can look at a fragment of pottery and place it within a century or less of its manufacture. This is not guesswork. It is pattern recognition built on an enormous body of accumulated data. There were sherds consistent with the Late Iron Age, the period period scholars associate with the later monarchy of Judah, the era preceding the Babylonian destruction of the city in 586 BCE. But interspersed with these were fragments whose fabric and form pointed to an earlier period, the Middle Bronze Age. The mixture could mean many things. It could indicate ancient disturbance, later material having fallen into earlier fills. It could suggest a long period of continuous use. When the wall was finally breached, carefully, with dental picks and fine brushes rather than anything mechanical, the chamber on the other side measured approximately 6 meters in length by 4 meters wide. The ceiling was low, no more than 2 meters at its highest point. The walls were lined with large ashlar blocks, the squared stone construction characteristic of monumental architecture in the ancient Near East. Along the eastern wall, arranged in a rough line, were a series of stone vessels. Some had toppled, others remained upright, their surfaces encrusted with millennia of calcite deposit. Their forms were consistent with ritual use: wide-mouthed basins, narrow-necked storage jars, forms that appear repeatedly in sanctuary and temple contexts. Beside them, partially collapsed but still recognizable in outline, was what appeared to be a carved stone table or platform, its surface worn smooth in a way that suggested long, repeated use. The team did not speak for several minutes. They simply stood at the threshold of this space, their headlamps cutting through dust that had not moved since the chamber was sealed, and they looked. The objects in front of you are not exhibits. They are the last arrangement made by human hands in this place before the door was sealed. There is a particular kind of silence in a space like this, and it is not simply the absence of sound, it is the presence of time. Scholars working with the team noted immediately the parallels between the stone vessel assemblage and similar collections found at sites across the ancient Levant in contexts associated with cultic practice. The platform form had precedence in excavated sanctuary spaces from the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. Biblical texts, when examined alongside material evidence, function for archaeologists not as a literal guide to excavation, but as a historical document whose references may or may not find correlation in the archaeological record. The Siloam Tunnel is almost certainly the conduit referenced in the books of Kings. The massive stepped stone structure exposed on the eastern slope of the city of David has been associated by some scholars with the Millo. The search for remains associated with the reign of David and Solomon, the period that the biblical narrative places at the city's zenith as a capital of a unified Israelite monarchy, has been one of the most contested areas of Jerusalem archaeology for decades. Some scholars argue that architectural remains from the 10th century BCE are present in the city of David and reflect the monumental construction activity described in the biblical text. Others contend that the material evidence for this period is too sparse to support claims of a large urban center. Every stone uncovered beneath this city carries weight that goes beyond its geological mass. The evidence must be allowed to speak in its own language, not in the language of what we wish it to say. What had appeared on initial survey to be a solid floor was, under closer examination, a later installation. Stones laid deliberately over an earlier surface, a floor beneath a floor. Careful removal of the upper layer revealed a packed earth surface at a significantly lower stratigraphic level, associated with ceramic material that pushed the occupation date of this space back toward the early Bronze Age. Every layer resolved reveals another layer beneath it. Every question answered generates 3 more. The city's history is not a line but a spiral, returning always to the same essential question: who were the people who lived here first? Resistivity surveys, a non-invasive technique that uses electrical current to map subsurface features without digging, suggest the presence of additional cavities in the bedrock to the north and west of the current dig site. The team cannot yet say with certainty what these anomalies represent. They may be nothing. They may be collapsed passages, their internal spaces long since filled with debris. Or they may be additional chambers, sealed and intact, waiting with the same patience that ancient sealed rooms always carry, the patience of things that have been waiting so long they have ceased to be aware of waiting. Among the artifacts recovered from the primary chamber, beyond the stone vessels and the carved platform, were several fragments of inscribed material. The inscriptions, rendered on small ceramic pieces in a script consistent with an early alphabetic writing system, are at this stage only partially deciphered. Inscribed material from this early stratigraphic context in a closed and sealed room is rare. It suggests that whoever used this space was literate, engaged in record-keeping or ritual text production. Writing systems emerge in the ancient world in contexts of administrative complexity, palace economies, temple institutions, trade networks that require documentation. One fragment, the largest of the group, measures approximately 8 centimeters by 5 centimeters and preserves what appears to be a sequence of at least 12 characters. The epigrapher working with the team described the experience of examining this fragment as standing in a room where someone is speaking just below the threshold of hearing. You know there is a voice, you can sense the intention behind it, but the full meaning remains just out of reach. The city speaks. It has always spoken to everyone who has ever lived within it, or fought for it, or mourned its destruction. It speaks in stone and soil, in pottery and inscription, in the shape of a carved platform and the arrangement of vessels left by hands that have been dust for 3,000 years. The chamber with the stone vessels has been carefully documented, its contents removed to a laboratory for analysis under controlled conditions. The sealed floor beneath the upper installation has been partially exposed but not yet fully excavated, a decision made deliberately. The tunnel passages that may connect to further spaces remain surveyed but not opened. The resistivity anomalies to the north and west remain unexplored. Somewhere beneath Jerusalem, in spaces that no human being has entered since before the Romans came and built their city above the ruins of what they destroyed. In rooms that were sealed when Babylon was still an empire and Greece was still a collection of city-states, and the alphabetic writing system was still young and strange and new. There are things that have not yet been found. They may confirm interpretations that scholars have defended for decades. They may overturn assumptions that have been treated as settled. They may describe a Jerusalem so different from the one we have imagined, and yet so recognizably, so stubbornly, so profoundly human in its traces. The sensation of finding, in the deep places beneath a city that has been everything to so many for so long, the oldest, most essential version of a story that we somehow already knew we were going to find. The chisel is set down, the brush is picked up, the dust settles, the work goes on, and somewhere behind a wall that has not yet been reached, in the dark that has not yet been entered, in the silence that has persisted for millennia undisturbed, something is waiting.